Welcome back to Cop to Corporate Life After Law Enforcement. I'm Sam, your podcast host. And on this podcast, we share real stories of officers who have traded in the badge for a new chapter in the corporate world, or in today's case, completely outside of the realm of the corporate world. So I'm so excited to welcome Hannah Betts to Cop to Corporate. She's a former cop in the UK, which is fascinating to me to begin with, and now a Hollywood stunt woman who calls herself a professional scaredy cat. So we're going to have to go into that. We will talk about her journey in law enforcement, what it was like to step away, and how she's built this new path forward. So, Hannah, welcome to Cop to Corporate.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
We are so psyched that you are here. So let's kind of go back to the beginning. Take us back to what your law enforcement career looked like, what inspired you to serve, and also what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so my time in the police force, compared to probably a lot of your guests, was short-lived. I was actually only an active duty police officer for 5 years, but obviously that's a long enough time for it to stay with you for the rest of your life. I joined in my kind of mid-20s, and prior to that, I was and kind of an outdoor adventure sports instructor that worked for a charitable organization working with inner city youth at risk. But I think I was encouraged to find a career that had a little bit more structure, more career advancement opportunities. I always had kind of good communication and leadership skills, and I was drawn to the idea of camaraderie and not being tied to a desk for 10 hours a day. So the police force was always something that intrigued me, and that's eventually what I moved into. Yeah. And
Awesome.
I was in just, emergency response officer for most of that time. The last year, I started to specialize in domestic violence liaison work while still responding to 911, well, over there, 999 calls. But that was
So
kind of my career.
in the UK, an emergency response officer, is that based like what a patrol officer looks like here?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing. Yeah.
The equivalent
You
of that.
never know what you're going to get for the day. Same thing. Yeah.
That sounds so fun. Where were you located?
I was originally located in Birmingham, which is the second biggest city in the UK. So it was busy. It was real busy. And then halfway through, I actually transferred to Nottingham, which is also a very big city. So I could actually be closer to the skydiving center that I was training at, and that's where the transition starts from my
Now, yeah,
police
now
career.
we're
I know.
moving into it. So, at what point did you realize that you were ready to leave law enforcement, that your time was done, and like what emotions or challenges did you have when you transitioned out?
It was an interesting time because it wasn't necessarily a decision where I felt I want to leave. It was more an opportunity that came my way that I had to really have some serious thought about. I was at the time I had become quite deeply entrenched in skydiving as a hobby, and what a lot of people might not know is that we actually have multiple competitive disciplines within the world of skydiving. And there's national championships and world championships and team events, different free fall styles, etc. And I had gotten pretty deep into that world. And I had the opportunity to be on the British skydiving team with three other women and train and compete for the World Championships in 2008. Now, we were lucky enough to get some sponsorship that was going to allow us to train full time, which was really the only way we would have a shot at getting on the podium. And so it was a decision to make to whether to leave and pursue this opportunity for 2 years or not. Now, I don't know how it works in the States, but in the UK, in the police force, they actually offer career break opportunities for up to 5 years, which I think is amazing. So they allow people to go off and, explore different avenues of life that they want to, with the view of coming back, doing a quick retraining and getting in the force. And I think they realized that retention was actually better that way if they allowed people to leave and come back as opposed to just leave for good. So when I made the decision, I did have the intention of coming back after the 2 years of training. It just turns out that I didn't. But it came with all the usual decisions of structure, leaving structure, stability. A lot of people were worried about how it would affect my pension in 30 years' time. But ultimately, as a kid in her 20s, I wasn't going to not take that opportunity for something that may or may not happen 30 years ahead in my life. So I chose to leave and train on the skydiving team. So I'm used to
100%.
that.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, in the United States, we do not have options like that.
Right.
Maybe certain departments do, but I've never heard of that. And I think
Mm,
that's amazing that, especially for retention's sake, which is hard here in the United
right.
States to keep people for multiple reasons, to
Yeah.
be able to give them opportunities like that. And so what does professional skydiving look like? And also, were your friends and family worried because you're already working in a job that is inherently dangerous, and now you're moving to another job that is also inherently dangerous?
I know my poor family. I asked them about it at the time, and they said they knew nothing that they would say was going to change my mind. So ultimately, they just had to trust that I was making calculated risks and being smart about what I was doing. But I think it was just something that honestly they just had to take on. And as a younger adult, I really didn't think about that. Now I look back and I'm like, my poor family. But I think they learned to trust that I was as safe as I possibly could be within the realm of what's considered a dangerous career or sport.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So obviously the move from law enforcement to doing stunt work and to jumping out of planes is a huge shift. So you told us about how you found your way into that career, but did you have any difficulties navigating into a new industry, or was it easier for you because you had been doing it for a while you were still a cop?
I I think there was a transition for sure, like leaving the force full time and being around people or no longer being around people that understood what we do get to see in the shadows, right? As police officers, we're often faced with the darker side of societies, and we peel away the layers and see things that most people are not exposed to during their life. And I think suddenly being around people that didn't understand that, all the different layers of societies, was tricky for sure. I think what made the adjustment a little bit easier is that I did go into something that was very structured and disciplined. Be on time, you're going to train, you're on a team. So I think that made the transition a little bit easier, but it certainly is a struggle when people just don't understand the day-to-day trauma basically that we see all the time that we just get used to as being normal.
That's a really great point, is for someone who's looking for another job outside of law enforcement to find something that is similarly um, structured, like you said, where you've got discipline. I don't know if there's some sort of rank structure there, but where it's something that you've trained for 5 years to be a certain way. You just kind of picked yourself up and put yourself into another role where you felt comfortable with how the pace of it all worked.
Exactly, the pace and not going to a desk or not something kind of too
Yeah.
wishy-washy. I think that without a doubt helped. Yeah,
Yes. And some people want to work at desks when they leave because maybe they were in investigations and are used to it. But for certain people who were on patrol for 5 years, who just love the movement and love how dynamic the job is, finding something like what you did is definitely, it makes the transition easier.
for sure. Yeah, I without a doubt that helped. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back on
Yeah.
it, that was essential.
100%. So tell us about what you're doing today. So this was, I don't know how long ago this was that you left law
Yeah.
enforcement, but
So I guess I think I left around 2007, and then after the World Championships, which we were
did
very
you win?
fortunate enough, we did win
Yes.
by the university, which was amazing, and the underdog. So it was a pretty awesome story to be part of. I really had to think about, whether I was going to go back to the police force or not. And for me personally, I had changed so much as a person and learned so much more about myself being in a different environment, different personalities, and different challenges that at the time, going back to the police force felt like I was just taking a step backwards personally. And I just needed to keep forging this path forward, even though that it was terrifying. It would have been very easy for me to go back to the police with all the structure and security. There was just something deep down inside saying, keep moving forward. So I actually ended up moving to California I'm working as a skydiving instructor and trainer, and I used to train military and coach teams and compete in California. So at the skydiving center that I used to train at. And so I worked there as a full-time skydiver for a good 7 or 8 years before I transitioned. I had the opportunity to transition into stunt work in Hollywood, which I've been a full-time stunt woman for over 10 years now. Um, so that was a
Wow.
transition as well.
That
Yeah.
sounds terrifying to me. And so you define yourself as a professional scaredy cat, but let's
Mm.
talk about how you were a cop for 5 years and then you were on a skydiving team for two, and now you're a stunt woman for 10. Like, what about you is how are you scared?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think I explain to people all the time that because of the careers that I've done, people have assumed that I'm just fearless or I have a different level of, courage or bravery than other people. And I really don't. I just think because of the scenarios that I have been put in front of all the time along the way, I've really learned to navigate fear and have a better understanding of it and when to listen to it and when to ignore it. And I didn't realize that I was learning these lessons all the way through life. And it didn't occur to me until more recently how people just assumed that my brain was different to everybody else's and I wasn't scared. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm scared all the time. Whether it was just walking into a room full of 20 cops because I was doing the briefing for a drug raid, that was more terrifying for me than it was doing the actual raid, in the first place, or transitioning to careers or turning up on set and doing a stunt that I've never done before. I'm always scared. I have just learnt when, like, to use it as a guide. And almost as a companion, one to keep me safe, but also to remind me that I'm doing challenging things, and normally good things come on the other side of that feeling. So,
I guess let's talk about that. So let's talk about fear. I think that fear is a really big thing for police officers who are choosing to leave law enforcement. Fear of everything, like you said, loss of security, loss of stability, losing that camaraderie, and just everything a lot of people are able to find careers afterwards where they can find similar stuff. But what would you say to officers who are fearful about doing that, taking that literal jumping out of that plane, if you will?
it is. It's the leap of faith, and it always comes down to the fear of the unknown, right? We start creating stories in our head of things that haven't yet happened. So what we're scared of is unknown. And I think within the police, we've always had a lot of structure and been told what to do, or a lot of guidance. And then I think you come out of that into a big whole wide world, and it can feel overwhelming. I think a really important thing to do, especially coming from an environment where you've maybe been dictated to your whole life, is to really sit and ask yourself what brings you joy and what you're curious about, not what you think other people think you might be or are, or the identity that you have like formed within the law enforcement. To really sit and ask yourself what makes you smile, what you're passionate about, and it might surprise you, and to give yourself time to ask yourself those questions, because it might be the first time you've ever actually asked that question from coming out of law enforcement. So I think that's hugely important, to give yourself a beat and ask yourself what what makes you feel excited.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. And what's cool about your story is that you turned what brings you joy and happiness and giddiness, that was a hobby, or that you were doing on the side of your full-time job, into your full-time career, which a lot of people have hobbies or part-time jobs that they do that with, but yours, it's so unique compared to a lot of people. And I think it's so cool. Like, this is us saying, like, whatever is making, like, bringing you so much fun in your outside life out of law enforcement, like, you can maybe turn that into a career and do, like,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
And I think the scariest thing about that is you don't necessarily know what it's going to turn into. But I am a really big advocate of, if something sparks your curiosity, go towards it, even if you don't understand what the final outcome is going to be. Just start, and normally the answers appear along the way. I think that is very important. But again, that's a very brave thing to do because again, it's the unknown. You don't know why, but I've often watched very successful people talk about how they started their career, not realizing it was their career that they were starting. And that's certainly been the case for me within the building blocks of everything that I've done. I'm the same now. I'm starting to break out into the world of public speaking and actually talking about fear, but from a much more vulnerable perspective, not the classic, oh, look at me, brave Hollywood stunt woman, like the opposite. But when I first took an opportunity to do that, I really didn't realize that was going, I was very passionate about telling people about it. And I didn't realize that was potentially going to turn into my next career. So you don't necessarily have to know why you're doing it, but I would encourage people to explore it for sure.
I love that. And I think that we need more people like you who are willing to be vulnerable about that, because a lot of people, especially cops, especially first responders in general, don't want to admit their vulnerabilities, don't want to talk about their feelings or their fear, especially because you can't be fearful when you're a cop. Be like, everything that you deal with, you have to be, you are the one and you're the authority figure there. Like you
Yeah.
can't.
And
So
even if you are terrified, you cannot show it for the people that you're serving at the time. And there's no way that we can say we have turned up to certain emergency response, times or gone to a job where it has been overwhelming and terrifying, but you have to shut that down and you just have to focus. And so we are so used to, not exactly as you said, not admitting that was terrifying, even though we handled it great. We get used to not speaking about the vulnerability in the times when it is overwhelming. And I think that takes a real adjustment because our career dictated that we couldn't. Otherwise, you won't have control of the situation.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just amazing that you're doing that. So thank you for being open and willing to share that, because I think that that will inspire a lot of people who hear you speak.
Welcome.
So, yeah, last question. What advice would you give to officers who are thinking about leaving or have already left law enforcement and are lost and don't know what to do?
I think it goes back to that sit with yourself and be honest and listen. It may really surprise you. Really ask yourself what you're feeling, what you want to do, not what is expected of you. Um, and I think as well, and just for me as well, if you're leaning into the corporate world or going into a different kind of a job, for me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned in law enforcement, I think, is how damaging it can be to lump people into categories or label them or dictate who they are before you've even been, listened to. But I think when you really listen and when you treat people as unique individuals, like instead of categories, you can create a space where they can be very vulnerable and honest without fear. And I think that's when people really feel seen and valued. And when people feel valued and heard, like in the corporate world, there's less fear of failing and they don't just do their job. They bring their best ideas, their creativity and their commitment to the table. And I think if people are leaning into that corporate world, like I think in both policing and business, like labeling or dictating limits people, but listening really unlocks them. And I think that's definitely helped me in whatever kind of career that I've gone into as well. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, you articulated that beautifully. So thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing your story with us. If you're a former officer or you're thinking about what life after law enforcement looks like, I hope that this conversation gives you encouragement and ideas for your next chapter, especially because we've never had anybody like you on Cop to Corporate before. And so I think that's going to be really exciting and valuable for a lot of people to hear, because there might be someone else who loves skydiving and doesn't know how to, turn that into a career. But yes, so we're so grateful that you were here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
This video was recorded and produced by Just Talk Studios, the premier video podcasting studio in Bellevue, Washington. Visit justtalkstudios.com to learn more and book your session today.